All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the game plan today. Uh, Super excited here. Opening day, MLB. Already a lot of craziness going on. We got a Dodgers lineup kind of last minute. So lots of unexpected stuff going on. And I thought we were kind of getting away from that with NBA having been that way for basically the last several months, and not quite so easily. DK Slate locked a lot easier, so that was at least a benefit. Yeah, so but uh, hopefully you got your lineups in, and hopefully you're here to give MLB a try this year. MLB has been historically one of my favorite sports to do. It's been pretty profitable for me, and then on top of that, it doesn't take nearly as much time from from your own personal life as, say, NFL or NBA, which we're constantly having to monitor who's playing, who's not for each given day. In MLB, you kind of get your lineup, and then we know how many at bats and at least approximately outside of pinch hits each of the players are going to get. So it's good from that standpoint, and hopefully it is something that you'll find pretty interesting. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the tools that we have. Sound isn't working. It says it's working. Uh, all right. Hmm. Is the sound okay for anyone else, or is it all? Uh, you can also click it out to a full YouTube page. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. At least it sounds like it's um, working okay. Um, all right. Okay. So I wanted to kind of go through the process here today, kind of what we have to offer this year on MLB, and yeah, I think this should be good and fun season. So first of all, we're going to have a lot of content for everybody. You can see I just loaded up our MLB page. We've got lots of articles. Emacs picks of the day, always a good place to start with. We got some spotlight pictures. We're going to have all kinds of great articles. That's always should be one of your first places to start. We also have a lot of coverage in the YouTube channels as well. We're going to be having multiple shows per day: an early slate look, live before lock, and a strategy show as well. So lots of different coverage. You saw 2 hours of coverage this morning. Hopefully you had a chance to check that out. Even if you didn't have a chance to check that out, it might be worth going back to listen to just to see how everyone was trying to break down their slates. So you can get some good ideas of what people were thinking. So I think that's a really good strategy as well. So definitely check those out. From a So outside of the content, this is always going to be my first place that I look, and we have a lot of it. If you can't read every article every day, definitely don't blame you for that. But if you do, just try to check out a lot of different articles, see which ones helps you out the best, and I think you can find something really helpful in each of them every day. So lots of good stuff. We can kind of click through them. You can just see different picks of the day, what stacks are good for the day, all kinds of just really great stuff. So yeah, really recommend that. Another thing that we have, of course, that is one of our major ideas behind the site is projections. Oops. Got to get logged in here. All right. Shoot. Let me go to a different page that's already logged in. See if I can get that onto the screen. Sorry about this. Um, all right. Where's that one at? Got too many things open. All right. All right. Oops, that's close. That's DFS, NBA. But I can work with that. We'll just go to another one. All right. So projections. So projections are always one of the biggest things that we have on the site. They give us a huge competitive advantage over rest of the industry in whatever category it is that we're talking about. And MLB, I think, is one of our strongest suits for projections. You can see on this page here, it's going to be a really basic projections page that we have, which is nice. You can easily pull out any of your items that are on this by just clicking copy, and you can quickly move these projections over to Fantasy Cruncher as well. It's nice because they go from the same format, column 1 being projection person's name, column 2 being the projections, and then you can kind of just delete the rest of the questions. So yeah, so lots of really good benefits there. And I think that is a super easy way to get started if you're in FC. If you're not in FC and using the lineup builder, Alex did a really good show on how to use the lineup builder on our site yesterday, so I won't spend as much time on that one, but there's a really good way to these automatically integrate in there as well. So another thing that we have that not many other locations or any other sites have really seen that I've seen is a probability of postponement. So this will tell you very easily if a game could get rained out or snowed out, I guess, given the current weather conditions here recently. So this is also super helpful. What I typically do on games that are very highly likely to get rained out, I'm very hesitant to play pitchers in those games. So if you have a pitcher and it gets rained out, you're going to get a 0 from that pitcher. If you get a 0 from that pitcher, you're very likely to not win for the slate. So very heavy risk on that. If it is a really great pitcher that's just in such an amazing spot, maybe you could put him in a couple of lineups, but even that is pretty risky. From a hitter standpoint, I really don't like to use one-off hitters in situations that are potential to postpone, because then you're kind of leaving yourself a couple of additional trouble spots. So first of all, in order to win, you need your pitcher to do well. You need your stack to do well, which we'll talk about stacks here in a minute. And then you also need your one-off hitters to do well. And then on top of that, that's already hard enough as it is. You're now also having to say, okay, this one-off player that I have, he also has to not have the probability of getting his game rained out. So that's a pretty worrisome situation to be in, and something that I'm not super big fan of doing. From a stack standpoint, I kind of feel the same way as well. However, like let's say the postponement chance is 10%, and the lineup has maybe 15% chance of being the top stack, which we'll get to top stacks here in a minute. it does make sense to still have a couple of lineups for those stacks potentially, because if the game doesn't get postponed, a lot of other people are going to go off of those stacks, and you could get that stack that has a good chance of being in the winning lineup if the game does play it in full at low ownership. So that's something that I definitely consider as well. So overall, I think that, you're familiar if you're playing in NBA and you've been playing that, you kind of know what this page looks like. But this is kind of the biggest difference there. So that's super helpful. MLB rankings kind of does the same thing as the projections. So here, the only difference is instead of a specific projection, you get a point total, which gives you a range of the projection, as well as a range of the value that those players are in. So these are also very helpful. This is a tool for the Express package. And if you're using it for MLB, in a lot of ways, the exact projection isn't nearly as important as it is in, say, basketball, because the projections are very much more, the range of outcomes is a lot smaller in NBA as they are in MLB. So getting these ranges from an Express package is certainly a good way to go as well. And then the other thing I guess that is really helpful is team totals. MLB is a little bit tricky. If you ever looked at the Vegas lines, they don't really give you a team total as clearly, because it's typically something like over under 3.5 minus 120. A lot of people will just say, okay, the total is 3.5, but in reality, it's not, because you are having to consider some of the factors of how much juice is on each side of the line. So we're giving you what those actual implied totals are, and those aren't quite as easily found throughout the internet. It is something that's becoming a little bit more prevalent. Back a few years ago, you couldn't find it basically anywhere, and I spent a lot of time kind of creating my own metrics for this. So that's kind of a helpful thing. That was on the projections page as well. So you can compare that across teams. So one of the other big things that we have as a major benefit is our ownership projections. A couple things on why the ownership projections are so good. One, it's similar reason for NBA. They're just going to always be pretty much the most up-to-date ownership projections that we have, that you can find across the industry. We got news that Will Smith and who else was it? I think there was another player that was kind of expected into the game, but Will Smith was the biggest one. He wasn't in the Dodgers lineup today. We had those ownership projections updated within a few minutes of that lineup coming out. That's just not something that you're really getting elsewhere, and I think is a major benefit for MLB, because ownership is super important. I mentioned in our chat the other day, got some questions about how I would think about ownership as compared to projections and ownership in general. Let's say in maybe basketball, a winning lineup might be something like 2 or 3 parts projection and 1 part ownership. In MLB, it's a lot closer. Ownership is almost just as important, if not more so, than the projection. So getting ownership projections that are updated with all the current lineups is super important, and is something that we should really be considering as you're making your lineups. So we got those easily importable. All of that information you can find as well right on our Data Central tab. So you have all the information we just talked about. If you don't want to go to each of those individual pages, odds of postponement, how many fantasy points are they going to get, what is the point values, what is the ownership as well. So all that information easily there for you, DraftKings, FanDuel, etc. So really good stuff there. On top of that, we also have ownership for additional slates. So not only are our ownership projections great for the main slate, these additional slates, and I guess there wasn't an early slate today. I don't know if we have the night slates up yet, that just so early in the day. But yep, we even have the night slate up. So these secondary slates and Showdown, you saw ownership projections for Showdown on the drop down as well. Those are super handy to be able to look at different areas, different contests. So one, like I said, ownership is super important in MLB, and no one else is really doing these smaller slate ownership projections. So we have a big leg up on the competition. And what I've noticed a lot in some of these competitions is the secondary slates, like late night slates or showdown slates, are not getting nearly the attention of some of the top players. And if they are playing those showdown slates and late slates, they may not be spending as much time on them. So they're kind of entering lineups that aren't nearly as optimal. And especially for MLB, that is super important. And I think you can get probably even a bigger edge than what you're getting on the main slates. Sometimes it might not feel like it because the slate is smaller and you don't have quite as many opportunities to choose from. Like Gossman here at 59% ownership, you're like, oh, it's Gossman. He's not super attractive guy to play, and he's 59% owned. How can I have quite as much edge? But it really ends up being a pretty good edge that you can get on these contests. I've seen it quite a bit in Showdown over the last 2 years in particular. Just my ROI is so much better than it is in some of the main slates, which the main slates are fine, and you can win bigger prizes, but they're a good way to offset some of the days where you don't do as well on the main slate on some of these secondary slates. So by offering this, I think that's a huge advantage for you as a subscriber, as well as anyone that just is kind of interested in getting into some of these other contests. So yeah, I think you should definitely keep that in mind as a possibility. All right. Before I go to the next one, let me check to see if we got any questions. I got all thrown off here by having the wrong thing open. Where's my YouTube? All right. What questions do we have? All right. Don't see anything in particular. Glad to hear the sound was okay. Sorry about that. All right. So it looks like we're good there. All right. So other thing that is one of the major tools that we have is our top stack tool. You'll hear this referenced on a lot of our shows, basically all throughout the season. And I'll talk a little bit about this one in a little bit more detail. So here, and we have this also on all the different options. So not only on DraftKings and FanDuel, we also have this for early, night, all the different slates that we were kind of talking about, where again, you could get a huge advantage over the crowd by playing some of these other slates. But let's just kind of look at the slate that we were just doing, the Dodgers. We'll kind of call it the Dodger slate with the 30% top stack. What this tool does is it essentially is giving you the probability in this column that the team that we selected are going to be the top scoring stack of the slate. And if you're not familiar with MLB, stack is essentially taking multiple players from the same team and using them in a lineup. So you're kind of stacking your lineup up with those specific players. So if you had, for instance, the 1, 2, 3, 4 hitters from the Dodgers in your lineup, that would constitute a stack of 4 players, and you'll hear that referenced throughout the conversations, throughout some of our articles. You might want a 4-man stack, you might want a 5-man stack, you might want a 5-man stack with your remaining players. There's 3 other ones, so you could want a 5-3 stack, etc. On FanDuel, you can only stack up to 4 players, so you could have like a four-person stack on one side and a 4-person stack on the other, etc. Our general strategy that we want to follow in MLB is that we do want to stack, and we want to stack fairly aggressively. In general, I would say you might want to do at least a 5-person stack with your secondary stack being a 1, or if you're doing 4-person stack for your first team, maybe you want a 3-person stack for your second team. Once you're getting too much outside of that, then it feels like you're losing rake to the rest of the field, because the probability in baseball of picking the very best lineup is often quite small. You don't need the top lineup that is all the way across the board. Because let's say in a normal competition, the very best lineup in MLB might be a score of, let's just say hypothetically, 300. The lineup that wins the contest is probably something like 220. So you have a big gap there between 300 and 220. You don't need to get the very perfect lineup. If we think about that in NBA terms that we're familiar with here just recently, let's say if the top lineup was 400 points for the very optimal lineup, you might need a score like 380 or 390 in order to win a tournament. So you have a very small gap between the very optimal lineup and the best lineup that's needed to win the contest in NBA. So in that case, you want to kind of eliminate the chances that you're taking, and by doing a stack, you're kind of eliminating the chances of things that might go wrong. So that's a super big advantage. Additionally, you have the opportunity, if your hitter gets on base as a number 2 hitter, your number 3 hitter might have the chance to get that RBI afterwards. Plus, if your number 2 hitter gets on base, that number 3 hitter has a chance to get an extra at bat. So let's say it was the bottom of the 9th inning and 2 outs, and the number 2 hitter got on base. Your number 3 hitter now has an extra at bat. If that number 2 hitter would have got out, that number 3 hitter wouldn't have got an extra at bat. So there is a huge correlation to them from that standpoint. And every extra at bat gives you a chance for a home run that could make the difference in that tournament. So the best way that I like to think about the top stack is, actually, let me finish going through the rest of these. So this is also the probability that the lineup is the top value. So that uses the same value metrics that we talked about on the other pages and essentially what you can see here is the Dodgers had a chance of a 31% chance being the top scoring stack of the slate. However, they only had a 7% chance of being the top value, and that's because their prices are so high. You could see, for instance, on the flip side, Texas had only a 5% chance of being the top stack, but a 22% chance of being the top value play. So those are both things to take into consideration, and you can also see it with Arizona here as well. And then we also include our ownership share. So this is the total amount of ownership that the players that are making up the stack have. So you can see here that the top stack is 30% and the ownership share is 27%. So it tells us that we're getting a little bit leverage over the field. We're getting a 3.6% more, which is basically just the difference between the two. The main thing that I like to use from this is a lot more this top stack and this ownership to kind of create this leverage of what is a best play. I don't care for the top value percentage quite as much. The main thing that I like to use that for is helps tell me some of the ownership rates. So if a stack is the top value, like this Texas one, we can see that their ownership share is a bit higher at 8%. You can see it also with Arizona. They are at 18%, so you get a 7% ownership. If you get a good value team, they're going to fit into your lineups and be something that you might be kind of just putting in to get a best lineup, and that might be something that other people are doing as well. However, the top stack, that's what you really want. You want your probability to get a lineup that is going to win you a contest. And especially if you're getting a top stack percentage that's greater than the ownership percentage, then you're really looking pretty good. So a couple of ways that I like to kind of think about this top stack is, one, I do like to think about potentially making a lineups almost proportional to this. So let's say you're making 100 lineups just out of simplicity. You might want to just make 31% of your lineups be Dodgers stacks, or 10% be San Diego stacks, 8% Kansas City stacks. This gives you that chance to have the most optimal allocation of your lineups into those categories. If you're only building one lineup, maybe just pick one of these almost out of random. Don't always just choose the Dodgers just because they have the highest probability. Maybe one day you choose the Dodgers, the next day, let's say these probabilities were still the same, you would choose Minnesota. The next day, maybe you choose whoever this team is, Arizona, then maybe choose the Dodgers again, so that your long-term probability kind of evens out to these probabilities. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You could find which stack you think is the best value. Or one thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about in the past in the poker world is just almost doing it on a random basis, right? So you could just go in and use a randomizer to choose which of these different stacks you wanted for that day. I don't know that I would go quite that far, but I think it could be an interesting way to do it, and it's definitely a way better way to do it than just picking the Dodgers or just picking San Diego. You definitely want to get some of these teams down here occasionally, because even though they aren't the best probability to win, when they do win, there's such a smaller percentage of the field that's playing them. So if the Phillies are the best stack of the day, which happens 3% of the time, only 2.4% of the people are going to be playing them. So you get a pretty big leverage over the rest of the field, and you're not competing with as many people. It's hard enough to win a tournament of 50,000 people, any given day. But if you can cut that down to a tournament of 4,000 people, or in this case, I guess even lower, it would be, it would be something like 1,000, I guess. So way easier to win a tournament essentially of 1,000 if you know that Philadelphia has to be the team that you need to win the contest. So mixing those up is a good idea, and make sure that you're always choosing from these. Don't always choose these guys, because I did use a lot of the Dodgers today. I deleted quite a few of them when Will Smith didn't play, but I think that it definitely makes sense to be able to mix these up, and this leverage column gives you a good indication of how much. So even like Pittsburgh, they're not super attractive. They're the worst stack on the slate, but they're still going to be the best one 2% of the time, and only 0.5% of the people are choosing them. So if you almost think of it as a ratio here of 1.4 over 0.5, it's not going to give you an exact ROI, but it's going to show you that you're expecting something that's over a 100%. It's almost like 4x often that you're going to get a winning lineup from Pittsburgh than you will that the public is owning them. So I think that's really key. And then you can kind of look at the different stacks and which ones. So just like we've seen on the Boom or Bust tool, how much their stack percentage is and how much their ownership share is. And you can kind of walk through that. But this, I think, is pretty much the most important thing for MLB. I'll always go to this page first just to see how the stacks are, get in my mind of how I want to handle my stacks for the day, and then kind of from there start reading some of the articles, looking at specific one-off type players, etc. So this is a great place to start your day off. From there, we also have the top pitchers tool. It works very similar to the top stack tool. In this essence, it says what is the probability that the specific pitcher, Glasnow in this case, would be one of the top 2 pitchers on the site, and what are the probabilities that they'll be one of the top 2 values. And then you can also compare that to their ownership. In this case, I do think that the value is a little bit more important. You don't necessarily need the top 2 pitchers to get the slate winning lineup. A lot of the times you want to end up getting better value so that you can get better hitters into your lineups. So both of these are very important. It's kind of similar to the top stack, but I tend to look at the top values a little bit more often in this case. Because if you see like Alcantara, he's got a 26% chance of being the top value, 14% chance to be the top pitcher. Almost you can kind of look at them together a little bit to just see how much good play that he is. In general, if you have this better top value score like Alcantara, it's going to allow you to get in some of the guys like the Dodgers, for instance, that are a little bit more expensive on the hitter side. And in general, I think that's a slightly better strategy to pay up for your hitters than pay up for your pitchers, especially on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it's a little bit closer to paying up with your pitchers or hitters there a little bit more. On FanDuel, we have basically the same thing, but it's the top pitcher since it's only a single pitcher slate. So there you can and we had more pitchers on this slate as well. You can see how evenly distributed it is for the pitcher to be the very top, and that's because their distributions are quite wide on their range of outcomes. But again, not nearly as narrow as what NBA players are. These are also still wider range of outcomes and not as wide as hitters though either. So that can be your kind of your comparison. They're somewhere between hitters and NBA players. But in general, I'm going to look at this top value percentage, and more often than not, the pitcher. A lot of people talk about starting with their pitchers and then kind of filling in their hitters from there. Typically, I'm going to start with my stack, specifically that stack one in the top stack tool, fill out my pitchers second, and then fill out the rest of my hitters kind of as a third option. So if I was building a single lineup or maybe 3 or 4 max, I think that's how I would approach those. So I think that is a very good strategy to go about. And then we have so lots of good stuff there. And then we also have our lineup builder. We have Fantasy Cruncher. We've been talking a lot about Fantasy Cruncher add-on. We'll do some more shows on those. We've been doing a lot of those on NBA, but I'll definitely go into more detail on those here in future episodes. But then we also have our own lineup builder as well. If you're doing just a couple of lineups, Alex walked through that in yesterday's episode, which was a good overview of how to use this tool. This is very similar to the NBA tool if you've used that at all before, where you can just kind of select through the players and build out the lineup that works best for you. So this is super great to be able to, just kind of see your lineup, see what the impact of the different scores are, and just building a handful of lineups. It also is super handy in order to see confirmed lineups and what their order position is. So the nice thing about being able to use this is you could just easily build your stacks first, like I wanted to talk about there. So because you can just easily click in the guys that are right next to each other in the lineup. You don't have to 100% have all the guys that are right next to each other in the lineup. Small gaps in stacks are okay. I get that question quite a bit. But if you're having your secondary stack as like the Dodgers in this case, and you have Betts and Taylor, for instance, that's not quite as good because there's a big gap in them. If Betts gets on base in the 9th inning, like we were talking about, it only gives an extra at bat to Seager in that case. It doesn't give an extra at bat to Taylor. There's a probability that Taylor might get an extra at bat because of that, but it's not quite nearly as related. And also, Taylor is not going to be very likely to get an RBI opportunity from Betts getting on base either. Most likely, either the inning is going to end before Taylor gets up, or one of these other guys are going to get the RBI opportunity before him. So it's a little bit more important to get that gap smaller on a secondary stack. On a primary stack, not quite as big because you have so many different players that are next to each other anyways. So, what other questions do you guys have? Let me check and see if anyone else has any other questions. All right. Not seeing any questions right now. I think that covers the main things that we have to offer on the main pages. We'll continue to go through these over the next couple of weeks on how you can utilize some of these tools and get the most out of all of your processes. And I think that we're really going to have a great year. Kind of stunk a little bit last year in the MLB season. It went by super fast. There was, let's say, I don't know, 60 games in the regular season, and it just didn't really ever feel like we got into the full swing of things. This year, looking super, a lot of forward to that, and I think we can have some big winners. So, if you have other questions, let me know. If you have suggestions for what other things you'd like to see in some of these tools, let me know that as well. And yeah, good luck to your games, both MLB and NBA today, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.